There is a mistake that men make the moment fortune begins to favor them. They tell someone, not always through words, sometimes through the car that appears in front of a house that did not previously have one, through the clothes that change in quality before the circumstances that produced that quality have been fully secured, through the confidence that arrives slightly ahead of the position that would justify it, through the small, almost involuntary signals that a man sends when something in his life has shifted and the shift feels too significant to contain. And the moment he sends those signals, something changes in the people around him. Not always visibly, not always immediately, but something shifts. The man who was regarded with comfortable familiarity is now regarded with something more complicated. Something that contains, beneath whatever warmth remains on the surface, a new element. An awareness of distance, a recalculation of the relationship in light of the new information, and often, beneath the congratulations and the expressed pleasure at his good fortune, something older and less comfortable. Envy. My name is Niccolò Machiavelli. I spent 14 years watching men navigate the most politically and financially treacherous city in Renaissance Europe. And one of the most consistent patterns I observed across those years was this. The man who revealed his accumulation before it was fully secured, before it was large enough and established enough to withstand the opposition that visibility inevitably attracts, consistently invited exactly the forces most likely to undermine what he had built. He attracted envy before he had the power to absorb its consequences. He invited dependency before he had the resources to manage its demands. He created enemies before he had the alliances to counterbalance them. And the man who built quietly, who revealed nothing before the revealing was strategic, who let his results speak only to the people who needed to know and only at the moment when their knowing served his interests, almost always arrived further and more securely than the man who could not contain the news of his own rising. Today we examine why. Not as a set of rules for concealment, as a philosophy of strategic discretion rooted in an accurate understanding of how human nature responds to the accumulation of others. I want to begin with the psychology of envy, because it is the force that makes everything else I am going to describe necessary. Envy is not the same as jealousy, though most people use the words interchangeably. Jealousy is the fear of losing what you have to someone else. Envy is the pain produced by the good fortune of another person, combined with the desire to either possess what they have or to see them deprived of it. This distinction matters because envy does not require any direct competition. The man who envies you does not need to want the specific thing you have. He needs only to perceive that your position has improved relative to his, and that perception alone is sufficient to produce the response. I observed this with remarkable consistency in Florence. Men who had been genuine friends, who had supported each other through difficulty, who had shared resources and information and genuine goodwill across years of mutual modest circumstances, were transformed by the visible success of one of them. Not immediately. The transformation was usually slow, operating beneath the surface of continued warmth and expressed pleasure. But it was consistent. The friendship that had been easy when both men were equal became complicated when one rose and the other did not. The man who rose rarely understood why. He had not changed his behavior toward his friend. He had not become arrogant or withholding or contemptuous. He had simply become more successful. And that success, visible and undeniable, had introduced into the relationship a new element that no amount of continued warmth could entirely dissolve. The awareness of difference. And awareness of difference in human relationships almost always produces some degree of discomfort in the person who perceives themselves as below. That discomfort, when it cannot be expressed directly, finds other channels. It expresses itself as subtle undermining, as the small and deniable discouragement of new ventures, as the slightly too eager sharing of information about setbacks with people who did not need to know, as a quiet, perhaps unconscious, rooting for the reversal of fortune that would restore the comfortable equality that existed before. This is not evil. It is human nature operating exactly as it was built to operate. We are social animals calibrated for rough equality within our immediate groups. Significant deviation from that equality in either direction produces discomfort that the group works, consciously or not, to resolve. The man who understands this is not cynical about it. He is accurate about it. and accuracy in the domain of human nature is always more useful than comfortable illusion. The first rule of strategic discretion is this: never reveal the scale of your accumulation to people whose position in your life does not require them to know it. This sounds simple. It is extraordinarily difficult to practice, because the impulse to share good fortune with the people we care about is genuine and deep and feels like the natural expression of warmth and trust. But warmth and trust, however genuine, do not change the psychology of envy. The person who loves you most can still be made uncomfortable by the visible evidence of your rising, and that discomfort, however much they would prefer not to feel it and however much they would deny feeling it if asked, will shape their behavior toward you in ways that neither of you may fully recognize. I watched this pattern play out in the families of the merchants I observed across my years in Florence. Brothers who had shared everything across a lifetime of modest circumstances became complicated when one of them succeeded significantly. Fathers whose support had been unconditional became subtly undermining when their sons surpassed them. Friends who had been genuine became competitors who had not yet acknowledged the competition. None of these people were villains. They were human beings responding to the human experience of perceived inequality in exactly the way that human beings have always responded to it. The man who understands this does not share less because he trusts less. He shares selectively because he understands that sharing information about his accumulation, with people who do not need that information to serve his interests, cost him something real without giving him anything of corresponding value. What does the sharing give him? A moment of pleasure in the telling. The satisfaction of being seen to have risen. The brief warmth of expressed congratulation. What does it cost him? The comfortable simplicity of relationships that were not complicated by the awareness of difference. The subtle shift in how he is regarded that visibility always produces. The invitation to envy and its consequences in the behavior of people whose behavior affects his life. The calculation, examined honestly, rarely favors the telling. The second rule concerns dependency, and it is one that men of rising fortune consistently fail to anticipate. The moment your accumulation becomes visible, you become a resource in the eyes of people who previously did not think of you that way. Not necessarily consciously, not necessarily cynically, but the human mind, encountering a person with resources, automatically recalibrates the relationship in light of those resources. The questions that arise, usually not voiced but always present, are about access. About whether the relationship includes access to what has been revealed. About what the revised terms of the connection might be. And dependency, once invited, is extraordinarily difficult to manage without damaging the relationships through which it flows. I observed this across my career in Florence with a regularity that became entirely predictable. The man who revealed his newly acquired wealth found himself the recipient of requests he had not anticipated from people he had not expected to be making them. Cousins who had not been in contact for years. Acquaintances whose connection had been casual. Even genuine friends who genuinely needed help and genuinely believed the relationship entitled them to ask for it. Each individual request could be managed, but the aggregate of them, the constant navigation of who to help and how much and under what terms and what the refusal would cost in terms of the relationship, consumed time and attention and emotional energy that the man had not budgeted for and could not easily recover. And the refusals, however justified, produced their own costs. The man who rose and then declined to share the benefits of his rising with those who expected to benefit from their connection to him was rarely judged generously. The expectation, once created by visibility, became a kind of informal obligation. And the failure to meet an informal obligation in the minds of those who had formed the expectation became a kind of betrayal. The man who built quietly never created the expectation. He never invited the request. He never had to navigate the impossible terrain of managing dependency while trying to protect the resources that dependency threatened to consume. He arrived at the same destination. But he arrived unburdened by the complications that visibility had imposed on the man who could not contain the news of his own rising. The third rule concerns enemies, and it is the most strategically significant of all. In the 33rd chapter of The Prince, I wrote about the importance of understanding that men will forget the benefits you gave them more quickly than they will forgive the injuries you have done them. This principle applies with particular force in the domain of visible wealth. The man who reveals his accumulation before it is fully secured reveals something that enemies can target. He shows his position before his defenses are adequate to protect it. He invites opposition before he has the alliances and the resources and the established reputation necessary to absorb and neutralize that opposition. This is a strategic error of the first order, and I watched it produce the same results with enough consistency that I eventually considered it a law rather than an observation. The man who rises visibly and prematurely attracts opposition that is proportional to the visibility rather than to the actual threat he poses. His rising, made public before it is secure, signals to people who might compete with him or feel threatened by him that action is required now, before his position becomes strong enough to be unassailable. The man who rises quietly, who keeps his accumulation private until it is established enough to withstand scrutiny and opposition, deprives his potential enemies of the information they would need to organize against him. By the time his position becomes visible, it is already secure. The moment for effective opposition has passed. I observed this in the political domain throughout my career. The prince who displayed his strength before it was fully consolidated invited challenges that the strength, had it been given time to consolidate fully before being displayed, would have deterred entirely. The prince who moved quietly, who built alliances and secured positions and developed his resources without advertising the process, arrived at a point of genuine strength before his rivals understood that the contest was already over. The same principle applies to financial accumulation. The man who builds quietly arrives at a position of genuine security before the people who might have interfered with the building understood that building was occurring. By then it is too late to interfere. The position is secure. The accumulation is established. And the visibility, when it finally comes from a position strong enough to absorb whatever it attracts. The fourth rule concerns what I will call the psychology of arrival. There is a specific error that men make when fortune first begins to favor them, and it is the error that produces most of the problems I have described. They begin to live as if they have arrived before they have fully arrived. The money comes in. The position improves. The circumstances shift in a direction that is genuinely better than what preceded it. And the man, experiencing the shift, begins to adjust his life to reflect the new circumstances before those circumstances are fully secured. He upgrades his housing before the income that supports the upgrade is stable. He changes his social circle to reflect the position he is moving toward rather than the position he currently occupies. He begins to speak and behave as a man of established means before his means are genuinely established. And in doing all of this, he creates a visibility that is disproportionate to the security of his actual position. He is displaying a destination he has not yet fully reached. And the gap between the display and the reality is a vulnerability that every person observing him can see, even if they cannot articulate precisely what feels slightly off. The men who accumulated genuine and lasting wealth across my observation almost without exception shared a quality of living below their actual means for longer than the immediate circumstances seemed to require. They did not upgrade until the upgrade was not only affordable but conservative relative to their actual position. They did not change their social presentation until the position that presentation reflected was already more established than the presentation suggested. This restraint served multiple functions simultaneously. It preserved resources that could be directed toward further accumulation rather than consumption. It avoided the visibility that premature display attracts. It created a reserve that could absorb setbacks without producing a visible reversal. And it meant that when visibility eventually came, it came as the revelation of an established position rather than the announcement of a developing one. The announcement invites opposition before security is achieved. The revelation of something already secure invites a different response entirely. The fifth rule concerns information, and it is perhaps the most counterintuitive of all. The man who does not reveal his accumulation does not merely protect himself from envy and dependency and premature opposition. He gains a specific and powerful advantage in every negotiation and interaction he enters. Information about resources is leverage. The man who knows more about your resources than you know about his holds a negotiating advantage that has nothing to do with the actual resources on either side. I observed this across hundreds of negotiations in the Florentine chancery. The party that revealed its resources first, that allowed the other side to understand the limits of what it was working with, almost always negotiated from a weaker position than the party that kept its resources ambiguous. The ambiguity itself was power. The other side, uncertain about what they were actually dealing with, tended to negotiate more cautiously, to offer more favorable terms, to leave more room in the agreement than they would have left if they had known precisely what they were actually facing. The man who conceals his accumulation carries this advantage into every interaction he has. The person he is negotiating with, uncertain about his actual position, cannot calculate with confidence what terms he can afford to accept or what he would be willing to walk away from. That uncertainty, maintained deliberately and consistently, is one of the most reliable sources of negotiating advantage available to any man who understands how to use it. This is not deception in the active sense. It is the deliberate withholding of information that the other party has no inherent right to, for the straightforward strategic purpose of maintaining an advantage that transparency would dissolve. Machiavelli wrote that the prince must be both lion and fox. The fox does not announce the route he intends to take. He moves through the terrain without advertising his direction, arriving at his destination before anyone realized he was heading there. That quality of quiet, undisclosed movement is available to any man who understands what visibility costs and what discretion preserves. I want to address something that I have seen misread in conversations about this topic, and the misreading produces its own set of problems. The philosophy of strategic discretion that I am describing is not a philosophy of shame. It is not the hiding of accumulation because accumulation is something to be ashamed of. It is not the concealment of rising because rising is somehow inappropriate or disloyal to those who have not risen. It is the recognition that visibility before security is established is a strategic liability, and the elimination of that liability, through the deliberate and patient practice of building quietly, is not shame. It is intelligence. There is a version of this practice that is unhealthy and ultimately counterproductive. The man who conceals everything indefinitely, who is incapable of ever allowing his position to be visible because the fear of what visibility might attract has become a prison rather than a strategy, has allowed a useful discipline to become a debilitating one. Strategic discretion has a purpose. The purpose is to protect accumulation during the period when it is most vulnerable, when it is substantial enough to attract attention but not yet secure enough to absorb the consequences of that attention. Once the position is genuinely secure, once the accumulation is established beyond the reach of the envy and opposition and dependency that early visibility would have invited, the strategic case for continued concealment weakens. The goal is not permanent invisibility. It is the timing of visibility to coincide with genuine security, to reveal from a position of strength rather than from a position of developing vulnerability. To be seen, when being seen is finally appropriate, as a man of established position rather than as a man of uncertain rising. That timing, managed well, transforms the response that visibility produces. The man whose position is revealed as already secure attracts a different response than the man whose rising is visible in real time. The first invites respect and alliance. The second invites interference and opposition. Build first, secure fully. Then allow visibility at the moment of your choosing, in the manner of your choosing, to the audience of your choosing. That is the practice. I want to close with something I observed in my own life that made this principle more real to me than any observation of others could have. In the years before my exile, I had accumulated something that was not financial but was real. A position, an influence, a reputation for clear thinking and reliable analysis that had taken 14 years to build and that I had not, in the years of its building, fully appreciated as the accumulation it was. And then, when the Medici returned and the Republic fell, I understood what I had not understood before. I had not protected what I had built with the strategic discipline I was recommending to others. I had allowed my position, my influence, my network of relationships with the powerful, to be visible in ways that made it a target when the political winds shifted. I had not hidden enough. I had not built the reserves of quiet alliance and undisclosed relationship and protected position that would have allowed me to survive the shift in fortune with something intact. I survived, but I lost more than I needed to lose. And in the years of exile that followed, writing at Sant' Andrea in Percasina with nothing remaining of what I had built, I thought carefully about what I would have done differently. I would have built more quietly. I would have protected more carefully. I would have revealed less of my position to people whose knowing of it served their interests rather than mine. I would have treated the accumulation of influence and relationship and reputation with the same strategic discretion that the wisest merchants of Florence treated their financial accumulation. Not because concealment is a virtue in itself. Because the thing you are building, whatever it is, deserves the protection that quiet building provides. Because the envy and the opposition and the dependency that visibility attracts are real forces with real consequences. And because the man who arrives at genuine security through quiet building arrives further, more securely, and more on his own terms than the man who cannot contain the news of his own rising. Build quietly, arrive fully, and reveal deliberately from a position of genuine strength, at a moment of your own choosing. That is the whole practice. And it is available to any man willing to do the harder and less immediately satisfying thing of letting the building speak for itself, in its own time, when it is ready to speak. Not before.